Hello everyone, and welcome back to Cycling World, your home for the biggest stories, the biggest rivalries, and the biggest talking points in professional cycling. And today, we have a developing situation that is creating serious discussion across the peloton just weeks before the Tour de France, because there appears to be growing tension inside Lidl-Trek, and the story is becoming impossible to ignore. Reports suggest that two of the team's biggest names, Giulio Ciccone and Mattias Skjelmose, are at the centre of a situation that could have major consequences for the squad's ambitions this summer. What makes this story so remarkable is that it involves riders who, on paper, should be playing a crucial role in supporting one of their own teammates during the biggest race of the season. Instead, questions are now being asked about unity, leadership, and whether Lidl-Trek can truly arrive at the Tour de France with a fully committed team behind its main objectives. At the same time, another fascinating storyline is emerging inside Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe. Florian Lipowitz has started speaking openly about the team's ambitions and about the possibility of taking on a bigger role heading into the Tour de France. After a sensational rise over the past year, many fans and analysts now see him as one of the most exciting general classification contenders in the sport. And that creates a fascinating question. Could Lipowitz actually enter the Tour as a genuine team leader, even with Remco Evenepoel in the squad? And if that happens, could he become one of the riders trying to challenge Tadej Pogacar for cycling's biggest prize? And this is where the Lidl-Trek situation starts becoming truly complicated, because the issue is no longer just about contracts or future transfers. It is about team dynamics, leadership, and whether the squad can realistically arrive at the Tour de France united behind a common goal. According to recent reports, Giulio Ciccone and Mattias Skjelmose have both informed the team that they would like to explore opportunities away from Lidl-Trek. In Ciccone's case, the frustration appears to have started during the Giro d'Italia, where the Italian rider saw his role change dramatically from potential team leader to supporting Derek G in the general classification battle. That situation reportedly did not sit well with the experienced climber. In fact, reports suggest that Ciccone has already expressed a desire to leave the team despite being under contract until 2028. And naturally, that creates an uncomfortable situation for Lidl-Trek because, on paper, Ciccone is expected to be one of the key mountain domestiques supporting Juan Ayuso during the Tour de France. The problem is obvious. If a rider is already thinking about leaving the team and starting a new chapter elsewhere, how committed will he be to sacrificing his own ambitions for someone else's general classification campaign? And Ciccone is not the only name involved. Mattias Skjelmose, another major figure within the team, has also been linked with a possible departure. The Danish rider is reportedly considering a move at the end of the season, despite still having a contract running through 2027. Suddenly, Lidl-Trek finds itself facing a very delicate balancing act, because two of the riders who should form a crucial part of the support structure around Ayuso may already be looking toward the future, rather than focusing entirely on the present. At the same time, the team is reportedly comfortable with the possibility of freeing up significant salary space, especially with Felix Gall expected to become a major part of the organisation's future plans. And if those changes eventually happen, the entire structure of Lidl-Trek's Grand Tour project could look very different sooner rather than later. And perhaps the reason why this story is generating so much attention across the cycling world is because many fans feel they have seen something similar before, because this is not the first time questions have been raised about Juan Ayuso's relationships inside a team environment. In fact, if we go back to last season, one of the biggest talking points in professional cycling was the growing tension reported inside UAE Team Emirates. What initially appeared to be normal competitive pressure gradually turned into one of the most discussed stories in the peloton, with constant speculation surrounding the atmosphere inside the squad and the relationships between some of its biggest stars. At the centre of those discussions was Juan Ayuso. Throughout the season, reports and rumours repeatedly pointed toward disagreements, internal friction, and differing visions regarding leadership and team hierarchy. Names such as Tadej Pogacar, João Almeida, and even the rapidly emerging Isaac del Toro were frequently mentioned whenever those conversations resurfaced. Whether every report was accurate or not is something only the people inside the team truly know. But what nobody can deny is that the situation eventually reached a point where a separation became inevitable. The relationship appeared increasingly difficult to manage, the speculation continued to grow, and in the end, Ayuso chose to move on and begin a new chapter of his career with Lidl-Trek. At the time, opinions were divided. Many fans believed Ayuso simply needed a fresh start and a team built around his ambitions. Others felt UAE Team Emirates had been justified in some of the decisions it made throughout that difficult period. Now, with new tensions seemingly emerging inside another team, those old debates are returning once again. Because whenever similar stories begin to follow a rider from one environment to another, people naturally start asking difficult questions. And that is exactly what is happening now. Fairly or unfairly, many observers are beginning to wonder whether some of the concerns that surrounded Ayuso during his final months at UAE may not have been isolated incidents after all, and that perception is becoming one of the biggest talking points as the Tour de France approaches. And while the spotlight continues to shine on the growing tension inside Lidl-Trek, another fascinating story is developing inside Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe, where Florian Lipowitz is rapidly becoming one of the most talked about riders ahead of the Tour de France. Because what seemed almost unimaginable at the beginning of the season is now being discussed more and more seriously throughout the cycling world. The possibility that Lipowitz could arrive at the Tour as the team's main general classification leader. A year ago, very few people would have predicted such a scenario, but after his remarkable progression, his consistency at the highest level, and his impressive Grand Tour performances, many observers now believe the German could be Red Bull's strongest card against Tadej Pogacar and Jonas Vingegaard. And if that happens, the consequences would be enormous, because it would potentially place one of the biggest stars in cycling, Remco Evenepoel, into a supporting role for the German rider, something that would have sounded completely unrealistic just a few months ago. But Lipowitz is not focusing on the noise surrounding leadership discussions. Instead, his attention remains fixed on preparation. And judging by his recent comments, the work being done at Red Bull's altitude camps is absolutely brutal. The German described how the team sleeps at more than 2,300 meters above sea level and spends the first days focusing entirely on acclimatization. According to Lipowitz, there are roads reaching close to 3,000 meters, allowing riders to adapt as quickly as possible to the demands of high-altitude training. Once the harder interval sessions begin, the riders descend to lower elevations where oxygen levels are higher, complete their efforts, and then climb back to altitude afterward. It is a demanding process, but one designed with a single objective: arriving at the Tour de France in the best possible condition. And perhaps most importantly, Lipowitz appears completely comfortable with the growing expectations around him. The German knows the challenge ahead is enormous, but he is increasingly behaving like a rider who genuinely believes he belongs among the very best stage racers in the world. And when you put all these stories together, one thing becomes very clear. The road to the Tour de France is becoming increasingly unpredictable, and some of the biggest teams in the sport are arriving at this crucial moment surrounded by very different questions. At Lidl-Trek, the focus is no longer only on performance. It is also about unity, because no matter how talented a roster may be, success in a 3-week Grand Tour requires complete commitment from every rider involved. If key climbers and domestiques are already thinking about their future, that inevitably creates uncertainty around the team's ambitions and around the riders expected to lead the project. At the same time, Juan Ayuso finds himself under the spotlight once again. Fairly or unfairly, the conversations that followed him during his final months at UAE Team Emirates have returned, and many fans will be watching closely to see how the situation develops during the coming weeks. Meanwhile, on the other side of the equation, Florian Lipowitz continues building momentum. What makes his rise so fascinating is not only the results he has achieved, but also the confidence he seems to be gaining with every race, every training camp, and every opportunity. Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe appears to have a rider who is rapidly evolving from promising talent into a genuine Grand Tour contender. And that could completely change the balance inside the team. Because if Lipowitz continues progressing at this rate, the leadership debate may eventually solve itself on the road. But of course, standing above all these discussions remain the two giants of modern cycling: Tadej Pogacar and Jonas Vingegaard. Every team, every strategy and every ambition ultimately revolves around finding a way to challenge those two riders when the mountains arrive in July. And that is why the coming weeks will be absolutely crucial, because training camps, team dynamics and internal decisions are important. But once the Tour de France begins, only one thing matters: who has the strongest legs when cycling's biggest battle finally starts.